Mara and I moved into the old farmhouse in northern Arizona at the tail end of October. It was her idea, mostly, getting away from the noise, the expectations, the people. She hadn't spoken to her sister in almost 2 years, and her parents were barely on the Christmas card list. She wanted distance. I wanted her to feel at peace again, so I agreed. We didn't have kids. Just the two of us and Rufus, our aging but loyal German shepherd, who still barked at squirrels like they owed him money. I work construction and do freelance contracting, so I wasn't too worried about relocating. Mara hadn't worked in a while. She said she needed time, space, quiet. The farmhouse was all of that. The place was a 2-story wooden structure, sitting on 6 acres of mostly overgrown land. There was a rickety old barn, a leaning garden shed, and a fence that had more holes than actual wood. Still, when we saw it, something about it clicked for her. She smiled wide for the first time in months, said it felt like it had stories. I should have paid more attention to that phrasing. The price was suspiciously low, but the seller told us the property had been sitting for years and they just wanted to unload it. We jumped on it. By the time November rolled in, we were unpacked. Rufus had claimed every square inch of the yard, and Mara had started painting again. Things felt okay until the lights started acting up. It began with a flicker in the upstairs hallway. Then, one night, while I was brushing my teeth, the bathroom lights went out completely, followed by a soft click somewhere behind the walls. But the rest of the house still had power. Being a contractor, I figured it was just a bad circuit, maybe some old wiring that hadn't been touched in years. I knew the breaker panel was in the basement, but I'd only been down there once, briefly, during the walkthrough. I remembered it being cramped, cold, and cluttered. Not the kind of space you explore without a reason. Still, a couple nights later, after another blackout in the guest room, I grabbed a flashlight and decided to head down. The stairs creaked under my weight, wood groaning like it didn't appreciate being disturbed. Rufus, who normally followed me everywhere, stopped at the top step. He whined once, then turned and padded back down the hallway. That gave me pause. The basement smelled like dust and rusted metal. There were shelves filled with old paint cans, broken tools, and boxes marked with labels like Winter '02 and No Good. The breaker panel was tucked into the far wall, behind what looked like a collapsed shelving unit. I spent about 15 minutes down there rewiring a few lines and adjusting load paths. Standard stuff. But just as I was getting ready to head back up, something caught my eye. In the far corner, behind a stack of rusted tool chests and a broken mini-fridge, was a door. A steel door. It wasn't like the others in the house. It was tall, at least 7 feet, and wide, with thick hinges and a heavy, reinforced handle. The kind of thing you'd see in a bank vault or a storm shelter. It didn't belong here, and I knew immediately this was going to be a problem. The first time I tried the steel door's handle, it didn't move. Not even a rattle. Solid as stone. No obvious keyhole, either. Just a blank metal plate where a lock might have once been. I stared at it for a long time. It gave me a weird feeling. Not fear exactly. More like the sensation you get when someone stands too close behind you. It didn't make sense. Why would a door like this be in a 100-year-old farmhouse? The next day, I told Mara about the door. She looked up from her easel and blinked at me. Weird, she said. Probably just a storm shelter or something. These old places had all kinds of quirks, didn't they? Sure, I said. But it didn't sit right. I called the realtor that afternoon, asked her if she knew anything about a reinforced door in the basement. She sounded surprised, told me she'd only seen it once during the initial inspection, and that the seller had brushed it off. Said it was just a storage room, that got boarded up after a break-in. A break-in? Later that evening, Mara helped me dig through the dusty box of leftover keys the previous owner had left behind. Dozens of them. Some were labeled shed, side gate, attic padlock. Most weren't. I tried every single one on that door. None worked. We both agreed it was strange. But Mara didn't want to dwell on it. She said the house was finally starting to feel like home, and she didn't want to turn it into a project. I got that. She'd been smiling more, sleeping better. But still, I couldn't let it go. The door gnawed at me. I started making excuses to go downstairs. At first, it was checking on the wiring. Then I reorganized the junk down there. Eventually, I was just standing in front of it for minutes at a time, staring, listening. That's when the sounds started. It began with soft shifting, like something or someone moving behind the door. Then came the low hum. It didn't happen every night, but when it did, it was always around 3 a.m. I'd wake up, heart pounding, and know somehow that the door was making noise. One night, Mara woke me up. "Daniel," she whispered, "did you go downstairs?" I blinked at her. "No? Why?" I heard footsteps above the basement. I got out of bed and checked the house. Every door was locked. Nothing was out of place. Rufus sat near the staircase, ears up, tail stiff. He was growling low, barely audible, but he wouldn't go near the door to the basement. I started losing sleep. Every creak in the floorboards made me jump. Every shadow looked like it had shape. I finally caved and called the cellar directly, using the number the agent gave me. He answered on the third ring. His voice was gravelly, unsure. I explained who I was, mentioned the door. There was a long pause. "It's nothing," he said. "Just a sealed storage unit. We lost the key years ago. You didn't mention it in the sale." "I didn't think it mattered," he replied. "If you're smart, you'll just leave it shut." And then he hung up. I spent the next day pacing the house, barely speaking to Mara. The call with the previous owner rattled me in a way I couldn't explain. The way he said it, "If you're smart, you'll leave it shut." It wasn't a warning. It was a threat wrapped in a suggestion. I didn't feel smart anymore. That evening, I found a locksmith named Owen in town. Middle-aged guy, kind face, with tools so old they looked hand-forged. I didn't tell him the full story, just that there was a strange door in our basement, and I needed it opened. He laughed at first, asked if I was trying to open an old safe. When he saw the door, though, his expression changed. "This isn't residential," he muttered. "This is some heavy-duty stuff. Military grade, almost. How long do you think it'll take?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Depends what's behind it. Could be 30 minutes. Could be 3 hours." I left him to it. Mara wasn't thrilled. She didn't like the idea of strangers in the house, but I think deep down, she wanted answers too. She'd started sleeping with the bedroom door locked. Said she just felt better that way. 45 minutes later, I heard Owen calling me from the basement. "I got it," he said, "but you might want to come see for yourself." The door stood slightly ajar. Cold air seeped out of the crack like a breath. It smelled faintly like mildew and something acrid. Not quite rot, not quite rust. A mix of both. I pushed it open the rest of the way. Inside was a room, about 15 feet across, with low concrete ceilings and walls that had been painted black. Not recently. Decades ago, maybe. The paint had flaked off in spots like dried skin. In the middle sat an old, ratty armchair facing the wall. Nothing else. No table, no TV. Just the chair, angled slightly downward, aimed at a blank patch of concrete where the paint had faded in the shape of a rectangle. The walls were scratched with markings, hundreds of them. Symbols, lines, Dates, maybe. None of it made sense. Owen stepped back. "You sure this is what you wanted to find?" I didn't answer. I moved deeper into the room. Found a pile of wrappers and water bottles behind the chair. Not old ones. A couple were from gas stations I knew had only opened in the past few months. That's when I saw the cot in the corner. A stained blanket folded over the edge. It stank like sweat and old food. There was a flashlight, a torn magazine, even a cracked phone charger with the cable chewed in half. Someone had lived in here. Recently. Then I saw it. Off to the right, near the corner of the back wall, a second door. Smaller, wooden, almost hidden behind an old shelf. I opened it. A tunnel stretched out into darkness. Earth-packed walls. A rotting wooden beam braced the ceiling. At the far end, a thin strip of light filtered through floorboards above. I followed it. It ended beneath the old garden shed outside the house. The trapdoor was open. No lock. Just a single, small footprint in the dirt. Rufus barked from the back porch as I came out, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly afraid. That night, I didn't sleep. I chained the shed trapdoor shut and nailed wooden planks across it for good measure. Then I went back into the basement and did the same to the steel door, even though it already swung inward. Something about it being open now. It made the whole house feel different, like a wound that wouldn't close. Mara didn't say much. She just watched me work with wide eyes, clutching Rufus's collar so tightly he whimpered. We called the sheriff's office again. A deputy came out, took another report, checked the room. He was polite, but I could tell he thought we were exaggerating. "No signs of entry," he said, even though I showed him the tunnel, the trash, the damn footprints. They said they'd patrol the area for a few nights. That was all they could offer. Around 2:30 that morning, we heard a knock at the front door. It wasn't polite. It wasn't frantic. It was steady. 3 sharp raps. Then silence. Rufus bolted upright and growled, his fur bristling like he was about to snap his leash. I grabbed the bat from under the bed and crept down the stairs. Mara whispered for me not to go, but I was already moving. I yanked the curtain at the front window aside. No one was there. I stood there, staring out into the dark, when something hit the window behind me. Tink, tink. Small rocks bouncing off the glass. I spun around, upstairs. Our bedroom window. I sprinted back up. Mara was frozen, her eyes locked on the window. I pulled the curtains open and saw nothing, but the ground below was disturbed. Mud smeared up the siding. Someone had been there. Before I could react, there was another sound. Not outside, glass. I tore back downstairs. The kitchen window was shattered inward, glass glittering across the tile. I made it just in time to see 2 shapes dart into the trees, fast, low to the ground. Gone in seconds. I called the police. Again. This time, they took it seriously. Officers swept the basement, the tunnel, the shed. They didn't find anyone, but they confirmed something I had missed in my panic. Inside the tunnel, near the cot, they found a photo. It was Mara, standing in the backyard. Her back turned, head tilted slightly. It was taken from behind the tree line, zoomed in, grainy, but unmistakable. We'd never taken that photo. The next few days were quiet. We didn't sleep. Rufus stopped going near the basement entirely. Every time I opened the door to bring down supplies or check the locks, he would growl and back away, tail between his legs. Then the cameras started acting up. I'd installed motion-activated sensors at every exit. Around 3:12 a.m. every night for 3 nights in a row, they would go black, just for 5 minutes. Always the same window of time. The rest of the footage would be fine. But during that window, total blackout. I stopped watching the tapes after the 3rd night. The last clip showed something that kept me awake since. a blurry figure standing just at the edge of our porch, too still to be natural, its face white and featureless in the night vision glare. Last night, Mara woke up screaming. She said someone was whispering through the wall. I checked the house. Nothing. But this morning, I pulled open the panel behind our headboard, where the old heating vent used to be. It led to a narrow crawl space, just wide enough to slide through on your stomach. I crawled in. Rufus barked and whined at the opening, refusing to follow. At the far end, in the dust and cobwebs, I saw something I'll never forget. A handprint, fresh, pressed into the dirt floor like someone had just been there. Still damp, still warm. We're staying in a motel now. I'm not going back without a team or a bulldozer. But some nights, even here, I swear I hear footsteps in the hall when no one's awake. And Rufus? He won't sleep near the door anymore. I bought my first house when I was 28, just outside Portland, in a small neighborhood called Crowsfield. The place wasn't big or fancy, but it was mine. An old, single-story ranch-style house tucked between two nearly identical homes. After years of apartment living with loud roommates, leaky ceilings, and no real privacy, owning something felt like leveling up. I was proud of it. But the silence, that hit different. You spend enough time crammed in a space with 3 other people. The noise becomes part of you. Music, talking, doors opening and closing, dishes clattering. It's all constant. When I moved in, everything just stopped. No footsteps above, no one shouting over each other. Just me and the hum of the fridge. I thought I'd loved the peace, but it was unsettling. I didn't even notice how much I'd relied on noise until it disappeared. Most nights after work, I'd step out onto this narrow little platform behind the kitchen. Technically, it was a deck, but really, it was a 3-foot strip of old wood barely wide enough to turn around on. I'd lean against the railing, take a few pulls from my vape, and just stare out over the yard. That's when I noticed the house behind mine. Everyone else in the neighborhood had said hello at some point, welcoming me, waving, awkward small talk while mowing the lawn, but not whoever lived back there. Their house sat directly behind mine, separated only by a 6-foot fence and a stretch of grass that hadn't seen a lawnmower in probably a decade. Tall weeds swayed in the breeze. The windows were caked with dirt. One of the shutters had fallen off and was leaning crooked against the wall. It wasn't abandoned, though. Sometimes at night I'd see a dim light flicker in the upstairs window, just for a moment. Then darkness again. There was no car in the driveway, no movement in the yard, no packages on the porch. But I was sure someone was living there. Curiosity kept poking at me. I thought maybe it was an older person, someone reclusive, maybe housebound. I wanted to introduce myself, if only to ease the weird feeling that built up every time I looked out back. So one Saturday afternoon, I circled the block, past 3 houses, and found myself standing at the front steps of the mystery house. It looked even worse up close. The siding was stained, vines creeping up from the base. A cracked planter full of dead sticks sat beside the door. One of the porch lights was hanging by its wires, like something had ripped it halfway off. I knocked, twice. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Just as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A twitch of movement behind the curtain on the left window. It was subtle. Just a quick parting of the fabric. But someone was watching me. I stood frozen for a second, unsure whether to knock again or just walk away. Then the door creaked open. Slow. Painfully slow. Standing Standing behind it was an older woman. Pale skin, papery thin. Long gray hair braided and tucked beneath a maroon shawl that hung over her shoulders like a cape. Her eyes were glassy, sunken, but somehow sharp. Like she saw through you. We stared at each other for an awkward beat. Finally, I cleared my throat. "Hey, sorry to bother you. I just moved in a few weeks ago, across the back fence." No response. I tried again. "I figured I'd introduce myself. I'm Derek." Her mouth twitched. Then, in a hoarse voice, she said, "Hallie. Mrs. Hallie." No smile, no return introduction. She just stood there, looking at me like I'd tracked mud into a sacred place. "Okay. Well, nice to meet you," I muttered, and I turned to leave. The door shut behind me without a sound. I didn't look back. That night, I went back out to the deck like usual. The air had that early autumn chill, where the cold sneaks up under your sleeves and nips at your skin. I pulled my hoodie tighter and took a drag off my vape, trying to shake the weird vibe from earlier. It had just been an awkward interaction, I told myself. Maybe she wasn't used to visitors. Maybe she had memory problems or something. But the longer I stared into her empty yard, the less I believed that. Because she was there, Mrs. Hallie, standing in the middle of her yard, barefoot, in the dark. She wasn't doing anything, just staring, right at my house. I don't even think she blinked. Her arms hung at her sides like dead weights, and her head was tilted ever so slightly, like she was trying to listen to something. I stepped back into the house and locked the door. For a while, I told myself not to overreact. I vented to a friend in a group chat. Everyone just laughed it off. "Creepy old lady neighbor lore begins," someone typed. "She's lonely. Don't be a dick." So I gave it a few days. Didn't go out back. Didn't look out the window. And for a while, things seemed normal. Until they weren't. One night, around 11:30, I passed by the kitchen window to turn off the light before heading to bed. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move in the darkness behind the fence. I froze, turned back slowly, and there it was again. A flash of white behind her upstairs window. She was up there, watching. I shut the blinds. Over the next few days, it became a pattern. No matter when I stepped out back, early evening, late at night, she was either in the yard or behind a window, always facing my direction. It didn't matter if I looked directly at her or tried to ignore it. She didn't move, just kept watching. It wasn't just unsettling, it was obsessive. Then, one morning, I found something in my backyard. It was small, tucked into the grass near the fence. A bent silver spoon. Old. The kind you might find in an antique cassette. It didn't belong to me. I hadn't had anyone over. And it was too old looking to have been left by a neighbor's kid, or dropped accidentally. It felt placed, like a calling card. I stood there staring at it for a long time before finally picking it up and tossing it in the trash. I told myself maybe it blew over the fence. Maybe it wasn't hers. But I was lying to myself, and I knew it. I stopped using the deck after that. Still, I'd catch her watching me from time to time, from her window or the yard, or once even through a slit in the side of the fence. She was always there. Just enough to keep my skin crawling. Finally, I called my cousin Drew, the most rational guy I know. He told me what I expected. Maybe she was harmless. Old. Possibly dealing with dementia. She Probably doesn't even realize what she's doing, he said. You should feel bad for her, man. She's probably just lonely. I wanted to believe that, but that night, I woke up at 2:13 a.m. to the sound of faint tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from my back window, the one above the kitchen sink. I crept over, moved the curtain slowly. There was nothing there, just the dark, still yard. But the spoon? It was back. Same spot, same exact spoon. After the second spoon showed up, I stopped pretending things were normal. I bought blackout curtains for every window that faced her house. I started sleeping with the bedroom door locked. My vape sessions stopped completely. I didn't want to risk even a second out there in the open. But still, I could feel her eyes, even with the blinds drawn, even in the silence. It was like her presence soaked through the walls. Then came the night that broke everything. It was a Thursday. I'd fallen asleep on the couch, face lit by the glow of some nature doc. I wasn't even watching. I woke up to a sound that didn't belong. Ding-dong. I blinked, disoriented, rolled over, looked at my phone, 3:42 a.m. Ding-dong, ding-dong. I sat up, heartbeat kicking in my ears. Ding-dong, ding-dong, ding-dong. It wasn't stopping, just this rapid, relentless rhythm, like whoever was at the door wasn't going to wait another second. A chill spread across my arms and down my spine. I didn't even have to look. I knew it was her. Still half asleep, I stumbled toward the front of the house, my body caught somewhere between annoyance and unease. I didn't even check the peephole. I just unlocked the door and swung it open. And there she was, Mrs. Hallie, in her bare feet, her shawl missing, her hair a wild mess. And in her hand, gripped tight, was a rusted garden trowel. The metal edge was chipped and brown with age, but the intent was clear. Her face twisted the second she saw me. "You took him," she hissed. "You have my baby's light. You took it, and I want it back." She lunged. I barely had time to react. She slammed into me, driving the trowel toward my chest. I grabbed her wrist just in time, the cold metal brushing my hoodie. We crashed to the floor, her screaming like something feral, trying to bite, claw, wriggle free. Her strength shocked me. She wasn't just an old woman anymore. She was rage and sorrow and something else entirely. "You buried it," she shrieked. "You buried the light in your house. He's cold. He's cold." I wrestled the tool from her Aunt Kira's hall, pushed her down with everything I had. She thrashed like she was possessed. My hands shook as I dialed 911, trying to keep her pinned, her face contorting in the moonlight spilling through the open door. "Get off me! Give him back! Give him back!" The dispatcher's voice was distant, robotic. I was too focused on keeping her from sinking her teeth into my arm. When the cops finally arrived, it took 2 officers to hold her down. She was still screaming about her son, how I had taken him, hidden him behind mirrors, buried him under floorboards. She didn't make sense. As they pulled her away, I stood in the doorway, heart racing, watching the red and blue lights paint my hallway in panic. A paramedic said something about psychotic break, and the police assured me she'd be transferred to a psychiatric facility. That was the last I ever saw of her. But it wasn't over. A week later, I was back on the deck during the day, just trying to convince myself it was all in the past. The fence had gone quiet. No more faces in windows. The grass in her yard looked untouched, like nothing had ever lived there. But something caught my eye near the back fence. Tucked into a sliver between the boards, half stuck in the wood, was a photo. Old, warped by heat. I pulled it out gently. It was a picture of me, taken from the back. I was standing on the deck, vape in hand. The exact spot I was in now. The timestamp in the corner read 7:49 p.m., September 3rd, the night before I found the first spoon. My face had been burned out, like someone had taken a lighter to the photo, melted my head into a black void. I moved 6 months later. Sometimes when it's quiet and the sun dips below the rooftops, I check the backyard of my new place. Just once. Just to be sure. Because ever since that night, I swear, I still feel someone watching. This happened about 3 years ago, but it still doesn't feel real when I talk about it. I wasn't planning to ever share it, but lately, I've been waking up around 3 a.m., and I always feel like I'm being watched. Maybe telling it will help. My wife Rachel and I had just moved with our daughters, Lena, who was 6 at the time, and Emma, who was 4, out of our tiny downtown Portland apartment. We were exhausted. Between school drop-offs, job stress, and the constant noise of city life, we were stretched thin. So when we found a modest 3-bedroom house tucked near the woods on the edge of a quiet suburb, it felt like a blessing. The place was older, with chipped siding and creaky floors, but it had a massive backyard with ivy-covered fences, Naz and these strange mossy statues scattered throughout the garden. There were 5 of them, humanoid, vaguely abstract, like something you'd see in an old European cemetery. One was especially weird, taller than the rest, no face, with arms stretched toward the back of the house like it was reaching. I joked that it looked like it wanted to hug us. Rachel thought they were beautiful in a creepy art school way. I didn't argue. I just wanted us to have a place to breathe. The first week was peaceful. Quiet mornings, slow breakfasts. The girls playing in the backyard like they were in some enchanted forest. I'd catch myself just standing by the kitchen window, soaking it all in. But after a few days, I noticed something I couldn't explain. One of the statues, the one with its arms stretched, was in a different position. I swear it had been facing toward the garden when we moved in, but now it was turned slightly to the right, its arms now angled closer to the back door. I chalked it up to memory. We'd been moving non-stop. Maybe I was wrong. But the next morning, another one had moved. This time it was the shortest statue, hunched over like an old man. It used to be tucked near the oak tree, facing a stone birdbath. Now it was almost 5 feet closer to the house, partially turned toward Lena and Emma's bedroom window. I didn't say anything to Rachel at first. It felt stupid. Statues don't just walk around. But something wasn't sitting right. That night, I stood in the kitchen with the lights off and just stared into the backyard. Everything was still, but the longer I watched, the more I felt like the garden was alert. Like it was waiting for me to turn away. I barely slept. The next day, Rachel mentioned the garden felt off. When I asked her what she meant, she just shrugged and said, "I don't know. It's probably the weather." But that night, I found footprints. Human ones. Deep in the soil near the back patio. Too big for the girls. Too recent to ignore. I wish I'd trusted my instincts right then and there. I didn't tell Rachel about the footprints. Not right away. I think I was trying to protect her. Or maybe I just didn't want to admit something was seriously wrong. I brushed it off in my own mind. Maybe the previous owners came by. Maybe a neighbor wandered over. Anything was better than what it felt like. That someone had been standing in our yard, watching us through the glass. 2 days later, I looked out the kitchen window and dropped the mug I was holding. It shattered on the tile, but I didn't even flinch. All 5 statues were lined up directly against the back wall of the house, just a foot or two away from the windows. Perfectly spaced, perfectly still. Each one staring into a different room. One aimed at the living room, one at our bedroom, one directly in front of the girl's window. I ran outside, adrenaline buzzing, trying to make sense of it. I grabbed the nearest statue, the hunched one, and tried to move it back to its original place. It wouldn't budge. I mean that literally. It was heavy, like it had sunk into the earth or fused with the ground. I grunted and strained, barely able to tilt it. There was no way someone could have moved these by themselves. Not without equipment. Not without us hearing something. The ground was undisturbed too. No drag marks, no signs of anything being wheeled in. Rachel came out and saw me struggling. Her face went pale. "What are you doing?" she asked. And when I showed her the statues, her mouth clamped shut. That was the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. We called the police that night. 2 officers came by, polite but clearly skeptical. We explained what had happened. One of them laughed and said, "Could be kids messing around. Some weird kind of prank." Rachel asked, "How would they move them? They're too heavy." The officers looked at the statues, nodded, jotted things down, and left with a casual warning to keep the doors locked. They suggested we install cameras, but we both knew that wasn't in our budget. New mortgage, old cars, 2 kids. Security wasn't exactly a priority until now. That night, Rachel and I stayed up. We took turns checking the windows. Around 2:30 a.m., she shook me awake. I could tell by her face it wasn't a dream. "I heard something," she whispered. We stood in the dark living room, looking out at the yard. Nothing moved. No wind. No animals. Then I saw it. A small figure, maybe 3 feet tall, darted between the statues. I opened the back door and sprinted outside, heart pounding. But by the time I got there, the yard was empty. And the statues? They'd returned to their original spots, spread across the garden like nothing had happened. The next morning, I found a dead crow nailed to the center of the back door. Its wings were spread wide, and tied around its neck was a scrap of red cloth. Written on the cloth in black ink were the words, "We see your eyes." After the crow incident, Rachel broke. She called her sister in tears and begged her to take the girls for a few days. I didn't argue. Whatever this was, prank, ritual, sick joke, I didn't want Lena and Emma anywhere near it. The house felt different without them. Quieter. Not in a peaceful way. In a hollow, waiting kind of way. Every creak made me jump. Every shadow near the curtains set me on edge. That weekend, I went to a local hardware store and bought the cheapest security system I could afford. Motion lights, some off-brand door alarms, and a used trail camera someone had returned. I strung it all up myself, hands shaking the whole time. Rachel stopped sleeping entirely. She'd just sit in the hallway outside the girls' room, even though they weren't there. I started keeping a baseball bat by the front door. We didn't talk much. We didn't have to. We were both just waiting. And then came the storm. It hit around 1 a.m., a loud, angry Pacific storm that shook the windows and rolled thunder over the roof like cannon fire. I was in the living room, flipping through channels without watching them, when I heard the motion light click on in the backyard. I didn't move at first, just stared at the glow filtering through the blinds. Then Rachel screamed from upstairs. I ran up, expecting a broken window or something worse, but she was standing by the girl's bedroom, pale as snow. She pointed toward the window. "They're out there," she whispered. I pulled the curtain back slowly, and my stomach turned to ice. There were figures in the yard, 5 of them. They were shaped like the statues, but they were moving. Slowly, like they were dancing. Their arms lifted and dropped in sync, their heads twitching at unnatural angles. The storm wind didn't touch them. They swayed as if to music we couldn't hear. I grabbed the flashlight and the bat, told Rachel to lock the bedroom, and went downstairs like a man possessed. When I opened the door and shined the light, the garden was empty, but the statues were gone. That's when I heard movement upstairs again, Rachel shouting. I bolted up to find the attic door open. We never used the attic. Inside, huddled in the corner, were our daughters. They were supposed to be at Rachel's sister's place. Rachel was sobbing, holding them, asking how they got there. Lena looked at me, tear-streaked, and said, "The garden people said it was time to come back." That was it. We called the police again, and they searched every inch of the property. Found no footprints, no signs of forced entry, no evidence the girls had even been gone in the first place, though my sister-in-law swore up and down that she dropped them off 3 days before. The last thing I did was check the trail cam. The footage was corrupted except for one frame. Just one. It showed our yard at night, statues in place. But in the far corner of the frame, almost hidden in the shadows, stood a tall figure. Not a statue. A person. Or something shaped like one, staring into the lens. We never left the house. We couldn't afford to. Nothing has happened since, but I still check the yard every night. And that tall statue? It's always angled a little more toward the hallway window, like it's waiting to be invited in.
If these stories sent a chill down your spine, go ahead and tap that like button and subscribe for more eerie tales. What would you do if you were caught in one of these unsettling situations? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd really love to hear what's on your mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.